richest man in Texas, accused of murder.
He stepped out and he said, "Hi," and he shot her.
I mean, there was no reason to think that he might not have done it.
He thought he could beat the rap with his millions.
It didn't surprise me that he thought he was bulletproof.
It was the trial that rocked the Lone Star State.
There was money, there was betrayal, there was greed. It was an absolute feast.
Could the multimillionaire get away with murder? Find out tonight on Power, Privilege, and Justice.
Texas, land of big oil and big money, and of smooth-talking tycoons who make their own rules and answer to no one.
I would say there's a very distinct difference between the wealthy oil families in Texas and those wealthy people in other states. The oil people, they were a tough breed.
And the toughest and wealthiest oil family in the state were the Davises, Ken Davis and his 3 sons.
I think the closest you might come to the series Dallas would have been the Davis family over in Fort Worth back in the heydays.
Ken Davis was straight-laced and traditional. His second son, Thomas Cullen Davis, was different.
Even in a state famous for big money and big egos, Cullen Davis stood out. Whatever he did it big. In the late 60s, he paid what was then an astounding $6 million to build his dream house. He threw some of the most lavish parties Fort Worth had ever seen. And when Cullen got in trouble, he did that big too.
On a hot August night in 1976, Fort Worth police received a frantic phone call from Cullen Davis's wife, Priscilla. She said a man had broken into their mansion, shot her in the chest, and was shooting everyone in sight. When the investigators arrived, they found 2 people dead in the house. Davis's 12-year-old stepdaughter, Andrea, was lying dead on the basement floor. She had been shot twice in the chest. In the kitchen, Stan Farr, the boyfriend of Davis's estranged wife Priscilla, was lying in a pool of blood, dead of gunshot wounds. Police had no leads, but Priscilla said that she could identify the gunman.
My mother said, "Cullen did it, Dee. Cullen did it. He shot me."
Priscilla said her husband, Texas oil tycoon T. Cullen Davis, was the killer. Police stopped Davis at Fort Worth's Meacham Airport as he boarded his Lear jet. Davis said he was going to Houston, but his pilot said the plane was headed for Brazil. Police arrested Davis on the runway and charged him with the murders of 2 people. The multimillionaire insisted he was innocent.
It seemed impossible. One of the richest men in Texas sneaking around his own house with a gun, shooting his own stepdaughter, but 3 eyewitnesses had said he'd done it. Could Cullen Davis really be a killer?
When T. Cullen Davis was born in 1933, his father's empire, Ken Davis Industries, was the world's largest oil supply company. Ken Davis ruled his family and fortune with an iron fist. Cullen and his 2 older brothers did what their father told them to do.
The old man, Kenneth Davis, was quite the tyrant and very much a disciplinarian. He was really tough on Cullen and the boys.
Cullen's father believed in hard work and modest living. Cullen worked 16-hour days in the family business and married the kind of good Christian girl his father liked. He drove a Chevy Impala and continued to live in his father's house. He seemed to be a quiet and obedient son. But Cullen had a dark side. He fantasized about how he would kill his wife if he got tired of her.
Cullen was a spoiled, rich, angry, aggressive young man.
Cullen wanted a Porsche, not a Chevy. Instead of a room in his father's home, he wanted his own mansion. He'd been collecting expensive things to fill his dream house for years.
One of the goals in Cullen's life was to have anything that he wanted.
By the time he was 35, Cullen was desperate to break free of his father's grip. And when he met Priscilla Wilborn, he saw the way to do it. Priscilla was the daughter of a rodeo bum. She grew up poor in Texas, dreaming of a better life.
She just had a lust for life. She loved art and poetry and everything that was positive.
By the time Priscilla was 27, she'd been married twice and had 3 children, a son, Jackie, and 2 daughters, Dee and Andrea. Her second husband was a successful Fort Worth car dealer. But Priscilla wanted more.
Priscilla was a little girl that had grown up on the wrong side of the tracks, and she really, really wanted to be socially acceptable in Fort Worth.
Priscilla longed for glamour and excitement. She dyed her hair blonde and started taking tennis lessons at the exclusive Ridgely Country Club, hoping to meet Fort Worth's social elite. It worked. Cullen Davis noticed the attractive blonde right away.
She was very petite and had this big mop of blonde hair, and sometimes she wore wigs. The best way to describe her is a Barbie doll.
Davis fell hard for Priscilla, and they were soon swept up in an illicit affair. Then, on New Year's Day, 1968, Priscilla's husband and a team of private detectives burst in on Davis and Priscilla in their Dallas hotel room. 7 months later, the two were married. Cullen's father disapproved of him marrying the flamboyant blonde from the wrong side of the tracks, but ultimately, Cullen wouldn't have to worry about that. His father died of a heart attack 5 hours before the wedding. Cullen and his brothers inherited the Davis oil empire. Freed from his father's shadow, the young millionaire could live as he liked. Davis hired an architect to build the dream house he'd been planning for nearly a decade.
The difference between Cullen and a lot of other people, that if he wanted a $6 million mansion, he could buy a $6 million mansion.
The ultra-modern mansion sat on 180 acres and had 20 rooms. It was so big it had its own power plant.
He wanted it and he got it. It was typical of his personality. It was just glass and marble and, concrete. It was just very cold. It was like a showplace more than a home.
But inside, Cullen created his own eccentric and expensively decorated fantasy land.
Cullen spent a lot of money furnishing the house. He went to New York one time and walked in an art gallery and literally bought the man out.
The thing that I loved the most was in their bedroom, they had a king-size bed with a silver fox bedspread. Now that was luxury.
The house definitely was Cullen's universe. When he would walk through the house, he would just stand there and look at it.
Life at the mansion was one long party. There were rumors of drugs and sex and even orgies. The decadent Davises were becoming legends in Fort Worth society. Cullen once threw a private screening party of the pornographic film Deep Throat for his golf buddies at the exclusive Colonial Country Club. And Priscilla had the Davis family skybox at Texas Stadium painted her favorite color, pink.
She was a very flamboyant, independent woman. And she just wasn't ruled by, what society thinks one way or the other.
Cullen lavished his affections and his money on Priscilla.
Every time we turned around, Cullen was giving her a new piece of jewelry or some kind of fur coat.
She had a whole huge closet and just fur after fur after fur. Oh, it was just unbelievable.
She adored him. She absolutely adored him. Cullen was the only man that my mother loved.
Priscilla was devoted to Cullen and did whatever he wanted. She even flew to Europe for a radical new plastic surgery procedure, silicone breast implants.
She loved her new life. She attempted to become a part of the women's club and Fort Worth society. But I think while she was interested in becoming a part of that, I don't think they accepted her.
The ladies who lunch in Fort Worth are a conservative crew. Priscilla would show up to society events wearing leather hot pants, a low-cut top, and a necklace with the words "rich bitch" spelled out in diamonds. But the Davises were still on everyone's A-list. They were in the society pages all the time, but they were about to make headlines for something else: murder.
Cullen and Priscilla Davis were loud, colorful, and very rich. They were also fun. And soon, in Fort Worth society, they were everyone's favorite couple. But Priscilla's daughter, Dee, saw another side to life with Cullen Davis.
He got what he wanted, and if he didn't get what he wanted, he threw a fit. He would yell and scream and throw things and break pool cues. I watched him literally push my mother down the spiral staircase. You never knew what would set him off.
One thing that would always set him off was any threat to his dream home. It was his most precious possession. Dee Davis claims that when she was 13 years old, Cullen shook her awake to scold her for not locking the back door.
And he said, "Why do we lock the doors at night?" And I said, "So nobody will steal your stuff." And he hauled off and punched me in the nose. And I'm bleeding everywhere. And my mother came up and was yelling at him saying, "What are you doing to her? Why are you hitting her?" And she had a baby kitten of ours in her arms. And he grabbed the kitten away from her and slammed it on the tile floor with all his might. And I was screaming, "Oh my God, oh my God," and he picked it up again and threw it down and killed it.
Fort Worth police received frequent phone calls from the millionaire's wife, claiming Davis beat her and her children.
The visits from the police didn't hurt Cullen Davis's social standing at all. Cullen was too rich and too powerful. He could get away with anything. So he was shocked at what happened next.
In 1974, fed up with his violence, Priscilla filed for divorce.
I think my mother just kind of pulled herself up by the bootstraps and decided that she didn't need him anymore.
Priscilla won temporary possession of Davis's $6 million mansion. She and her children, Jackie, Dee, and Andrea, were living in the dream home Cullen had built. And now, the millionaire couldn't even enter it without her permission. Priscilla was free from Davis's tyranny, free to do whatever she liked. And what she liked was life on the wild side.
She was running around with a pretty rough bunch of people that I don't think she really had any control over. They were known to be in drugs and motorcycles.
Davis immediately started dating a blonde secretary, Karen Master, a divorced mother of two.
Karen Masters, he was turning her into another Priscilla. I mean, she had the boob job and the blonde hair and dressed very much like Priscilla.
Davis took his new girlfriend everywhere in Fort Worth. Priscilla brought her new boyfriend, local bar owner Stan Farr, home to live in Cullen's mansion. Stan urged Priscilla to settle her divorce with Davis quickly, but Priscilla was holding out for a big settlement.
I don't think she wanted to give up on that house. She wanted that house, and she was not willing to give up.
Davis's lawyers told him that Priscilla might not only be awarded the mansion, but a big chunk of the oil company too. Then Priscilla's lawyers tied up all his assets. That meant Ken Davis Oil couldn't complete any business deals without the divorce court's permission.
Someone else was telling him what to do with his money, and he's not used to that. Cullen decides what he does with his money, not anyone else.
Davis's personal problems were getting in the way of company profits, and Cullen's brothers were furious.
He suffered a violent dressing down, shall we say, from his older brother about the divorce not being over with, and, just kind of cussed him out.
Priscilla was costing Cullen money, and worse, damaging his pride. She was threatening his mansion, his dream house, and now the family's fortune.
I really didn't know to the extent that he was obsessed with the house until he almost lost it.
His estranged wife Priscilla was threatening to take half his fortune and his most beloved possession, his $6 million mansion.
Nobody realized just how obsessed Cullen Davis was about the mansion. Who would? The place looks like a municipal building. But he loved it. In fact, if you believe Priscilla, he loved it enough to kill for it.
On August 2nd, 1976, Priscilla Davis and Stan Farr, her live-in boyfriend, got home from a dinner party and found the mansion unlocked. Priscilla wondered why her 12-year-old daughter, Andrea, didn't set the house alarm before going to bed. As she entered the house, Priscilla saw a bloody handprint on the basement door. What Priscilla said happened next was horrifying.
She screamed for Stan after she saw the blood. Cullen stepped out of the laundry room, and he had a shoulder-length woman's wig on his head, and he said, "Hi," and he shot her. And she fell, and she started screaming to Stan, "Go back, go back, go back, Stan, go back, run. Cullen shot me, run."
The gunman fired at Stan.
He fell to the ground, and he looked over at my mother, and he said, "I love you," and he died. My mother watched him die.
Priscilla tried to run away, but the man with the gun grabbed her.
And my mother said that Cullen pulled her up underneath her arms, and she said, "I love you, I love you. I've never loved anybody else. Please, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it."
Then, a second car pulled into the driveway. Two friends were dropping by for a nightcap, Bubba Gavrell and his fiancée, Beverly Bass.
They hear some commotion in the patio area, which is surrounded by about a 6-foot-high rock wall. And so they walk around, and about this time, a man in black kind of steps out in the shadows, and it's real dark. And the light hits him. She sees him. She says, "That's Cullen."
The gunman fired. The bullet lodged in Bubba's spine. He was paralyzed. Beverly took off running.
My mother, meanwhile, is running with a gunshot wound to the chest, and she made it to a neighborhood and said, "Help me, please help me, please help me, I've been shot. Cullen's up there shooting everybody."
Police soon discovered that Stan Farr was not the only fatality that night. When they arrived at the mansion, investigators found Priscilla's 12-year-old daughter, Andrea, dead.
She was killed in the basement by a single gunshot, close range, to the chest. That's a terrible way for a 12-year-old. It's a terrible way for a 12-year-old to die.
Police cordoned off the mansion and the neighborhood. Although investigators couldn't find the gun, they did determine that both victims were shot with the same weapon. Police charged T. Cullen Davis with 2 counts of capital murder and locked him up without bail.
Priscilla said it was Cullen that shot her. Beverly Bass said it's Cullen. Bubba Gavrell said it was Cullen that shot him. I mean, there was no reason in the beginning to think that he might not have done it.
Cullen's case seemed impossible to defend. But there was one lawyer who thought he could do it. A young Texas hotshot, Richard Haynes, was building a reputation for defending the indefensible and getting clients everyone else thought were guilty off.
Somebody wrote, Haynes is arrogant, but it's the arrogance of excellence. And I thought that was great.
For Haynes, nicknamed Racehorse, Cullen's case was a challenge and a chance to get in on a high-profile case.
Racehorse Haynes is a spellbinder in and out of the courtroom. He's got this very expressive face, and of course, and he's so articulate, and he's relentless. You know, they said he could cross-examine a tree for 3 days.
Haynes convinced the judge to move Davis's trial to Amarillo in the Texas Panhandle. He said it was neutral territory that had not been rocked by the murderous scandal.
We went up there on the theory that it was fine with us, kind of a West Texas community that would dispense justice. I thought it was a good selection.
It seemed Haynes had hoodwinked the prosecution. Davis had business associates in the Texas Panhandle. While the millionaire was locked up in the Amarillo jail, Haynes treated Davis's friends to first-class dinners. He played golf with them. He even attended Sunday services with their families.
We tried to live the proper, clean life while we're up there, because the failure to do so gets out. Somebody would report they saw Lawyer Haynes doing a handstand on the bar, you know, if you did it. So you can't do that. It could hurt the client.
It wasn't long before Amarillo had made up its mind about the millionaire. Davis was being framed by a vindictive wife who wanted his money.
He was a sort of populist folk hero in the same sense that maybe Jesse James seemed to be. An outlaw that the public seemed to wish to embrace.
Although Davis was on trial for his life, in Amarillo, he was treated like visiting royalty.
People seemed to believe that rich people were somehow different than other people.
When the court broke for lunch, Cullen didn't eat in his cell like an ordinary prisoner. He got special treatment. In a vacant jury room, he dined on inch-thick T-bone steaks served by waiters in gold jackets. Among his lunch guests were some of the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders.
It was about the richest man ever tried for murder. They put him on this pedestal. They were incapable of seeing him as a cold-blooded murderer.
Every day, Davis had fans who waited for hours just to take a picture with him.
Cullen did have groupies, and it was extraordinary. It was like he was a rock star. There were women that swooned at the sight of him. They brought him cookies and Bibles.
Cullen Davis had won over Amarillo, but it would be up to Racehorse Haynes to win over the jury, if he could. Cullen Davis was on trial for his life. His own wife had sworn she saw him shoot a man. But Davis's lawyer, Racehorse Haynes, knew Priscilla's sexy flamboyance and wild lifestyle could be used to destroy her credibility. The prosecutor warned Priscilla what was coming.
On the first day of the trial, Priscilla shows up wearing a gold cross, a blouse up to here, and a long skirt. It was like something out of Little House on the Prairie, but it didn't work. Everyone knew too much about Priscilla.
They made such fun of this harlot going to trial, trying to change her persona.
Haynes accused Priscilla of being a drug addict, addicted to Percodan, a painkiller. Priscilla denied ever using the drug, but Haynes produced records showing that she had purchased Percodan. He painted Priscilla as a liar and a drug user.
Racehorse Haynes put her on trial instead of Cullen Davis.
Next, Haynes brought in people to testify that Priscilla had also used cocaine and heroin, and that at the mansion, she held orgies where she played hostess to an endless parade of drug dealers, motorcycle gang members, and swingers. Priscilla denied it all.
It was an absolute feast. There was money, there was betrayal, there was greed, there was lust, and they even managed to throw some drugs and sex in there because it just made for good defense.
We objected and objected and objected. But once you get it all in there, it's like throwing the skunk in the jury box and telling the jury not to smell it.
The defense did such a superb job. Probably a couple of jurors would ready to jump out of the box and just hang her right there in the courtroom.
My mother stated, "I have never claimed to be Snow White. However, I have never killed anyone. What I do or don't do is insignificant to the fact that my 12-year-old daughter was killed."
Haynes' strategy seemed to be having an impact on the jury. In the courtroom, some jurors were greeting Cullen with smiles and winking at Haynes. Cullen even paid the courtroom sketch artist to draw portraits of the jurors, which he then gave to their families.
Almost a year and a half after it started, the trial was about to end without the accused ever taking the stand.
They didn't have any physical evidence. In fact, the matter is the physical evidence was all consistent with Cullen not being guilty.
Racehorse Haynes argued that the gunman could have been a drug dealer, a robber, or an angry business associate. But most importantly, Haynes said the state's entire case rested on the testimony of Priscilla Davis, who had lied about her drug use and possibly lied about other things as well.
It hurt her to her heart that she was being trashed. It tore her apart. But she held on to the belief that justice would prevail.
The jury deliberated for just 4.5 hours before the foreman emerged.
I was sitting right next to Cullen, and I remember him grabbing me and just, very, very tight grip around my waist, and he was very nervous as the verdict was coming in.
When the 12 jurors took their seats, Davis stood. The jury delivered its verdict. T. Cullen Davis was not guilty. He was a free man.
I was absolutely stunned. I absolutely couldn't believe it. And it was like my guts just fell out of me.
Cullen hugged everybody and said thank you and shook hands. It was as close as I've seen him to having tears and being very emotional.
And my mother, she was shocked and believed that he got away with it.
The night of his acquittal, Davis celebrated his victory at Rhett Butler's, the inn place in Amarillo.
The mood was obviously one of great joy and jubilation, and probably to some extent we overindulged in the libation, as young people might do. I was not a total stranger to Jack Daniels at that time.
The media, the groupies, and even the trial judge showed up.
And then some of the jurors started showing up, and then some of the bailiffs started showing up. And it was absolutely unbelievable.
This was some scene. The bar was open and the Jack Daniels was flowing. Even if you thought Cullen was a killer, you had to admit he knew how to throw a party.
People would say, How could he have done it? A person with that much money, they don't do it themselves. They hire somebody to do it. Everybody knows that.
Years later, police found out that Davis had bribed the prosecutor's lead investigator for details about the state's strategy.
It just makes you want to puke. It's despicable.
But in 1977, no one knew what Davis had done, and Fort Worth society welcomed the millionaire back with open arms. But now, Davis was locked in a battle with the judge in charge of his divorce settlement, and Judge Edson didn't care how much money Davis had.
Judge Edson was an old school judge. The majority of his rulings favored Priscilla. And Cullen was being thwarted at every turn. He was just not winning the divorce case.
Cullen Davis's sense of entitlement made losing the case an impossibility for him. It seemed like he couldn't win in court and needed a new strategy.
According to David McCrory, Davis did find a new strategy, and it was murder. McCrory, a former business associate of the millionaire, told the FBI that Davis had asked him to hire a hitman to kill the judge. The FBI came up with a plan. On August 20th, 1978, Davis drove his baby blue Cadillac to Coco's famous hamburgers in Fort Worth. He was there to meet David McCrory. FBI agents sat in a van taping the encounter.
I got Judge Edson dead for you.
McCrory showed Davis a black and white photo of Judge Edson curled up in an open trunk of a car. Dark splotches covered the back of his T-shirt. It looked like blood, but it wasn't.
As proof that, in fact, the execution had been carried out, the FBI took Judge Edson, put him in the trunk of a car, took McDonald's ketchup packets, as I recall, and smeared them around a bit.
When Davis saw the picture of the dead judge, he handed McCrory $25,000.
I'll get the rest of them dead for you. You want a bunch of people dead, right?
The FBI agents taping the conversation were stunned. It sounded like Cullen was ordering the murders of 13 other people, including Priscilla and her daughter Dee. 5 minutes later, Cullen Davis was arrested at a phone booth outside a nearby Kentucky Fried Chicken and charged with arranging the murder of Judge Joe Edson. The sting had worked. The millionaire was behind bars again, this time charged with murder for hire. Davis begged the king of the Texas legal fraternity, Richard Racehorse Haynes, to defend him again.
I thought it was the case that was interesting. Nobody got killed. That's a blessing. Just had a body of a judge posed in the back of a car with ketchup on him.
This time, Haynes wanted $2 million to defend the oil magnate, far more than the $250,000 he made on Davis's last case.
Racehorse felt like he perhaps had not been paid sufficiently for the first case, that certainly he had deserved more, and so for the second time around he was prepared to ask a staggering amount, did, and in fact got it.
Haynes had worked magic in the first trial, but this time he was up against a bigger problem than eyewitnesses. The prosecution seemed to have Davis down cold. The videotapes appeared to show Davis in the act of paying for a murder, and then ordering more killings.
How much more evidence do you need? And I thought, God, they got him. We have another chance to see justice done.
And it's seldom that you have evidence of the crime in progress. My contention to the jury was they could see it, they could hear it. They were really out there on the parking lot in that FBI surveillance van that morning.
Racehorse Haynes had to prove that what the jury saw on the tape wasn't what it looked like. It seemed impossible, But Davis wasn't worried.
He was a kind of guy that, you know, he'd walked through the firestorm of Amarillo, and it didn't surprise me that he thought he was bulletproof.
The oil tycoon's fans never lost faith in Davis. Prosecutors received hate mail and death threats daily.
When we would kind of walk the gauntlet to the courthouse door each morning, they would boo the prosecutors. They would spit at the prosecutors. It was very bizarre.
Once again, Cullen Davis's trial was the best show in town.
I mean, he was signing autographs, for crying out loud. You know, people actually wanted his autograph.
Cullen Davis had the public's affection, but no matter how much they liked him, the evidence was hard to ignore.
The prosecution was going to get another shot at putting Cullen Davis away. But Davis had something up his sleeve, a defense so ballsy that it would shock and confound everyone.
In October 1979, Davis took the stand and told his version of what happened when he met with David McCrory.
In a nutshell, what Cullen was saying is that he thought he was acting as a double agent.
Davis said he was working with the FBI, that David McCrory was the bad guy.
What Cullen was saying is that he had been contacted by the FBI and told to play along with David McCrory because the FBI was really investigating David McCrory and a group of people that were trying to extort or blackmail or even harm Cullen. It's almost laughable.
The FBI denied having anything to do with Davis. The prosecution believed their case was solid. They had hard evidence, videotapes of Davis paying for a murder.
We just were very concerned. We weren't convinced at all that it was going to be a not guilty.
But if Davis was worried, he wasn't letting it show in public.
During the trial, Cullen threw a huge birthday party for himself and invited the sheriff of Fort Worth. The sheriff was delighted to come and showed up with Davis's old prison uniform and a hacksaw. Then he presented Davis with a key to the county jail. Well, what do you give a man who has everything?
I was just disgusted. Here's the chief uniformed law enforcement officer of Tarrant County pandering to a child killer.
It took the jury 2.5 days to decide Cullen Davis's fate. On November 9th, 1979, they were ready with the verdict.
I remember I walked up to Haynes and I said, what do you think? He said, our ship just sunk. And I remember that was the first time I'd seen Cullen so nervous.
The courtroom was completely silent as the foreman stood up and announced the verdict. Cullen Davis, the richest man ever tried for murder, was found not guilty again.
Of course, we were thunderstruck. The defense was thunderstruck. Cullen looked like a person who had just survived a plane crash. He looked almost like he was in shock. I mean, he was rocked back. He was physically affected. And of course, the courtroom erupted. The judge uttered an expletive and got up and stomped off the bench. It was amazing.
Justice was not served. But, you know, he had the money and he had the power to get him out of it.
When you put on the scales of justice $250 million plus the Bill of Rights, the scales begin to tip in favor of the defendant. You can't blame the rich guy for taking advantage of it, and he did.
Cullen Davis had a lot of luck in Texas courtrooms, and he was about to get even luckier. Judge Edson stepped down from his divorce case, and the new judge ruled in Davis's favor. The millionaire got his dream house back and everything in it. Priscilla was awarded a mere $3.5 million instead of the $100 million her lawyers had sought.
She was desperate for it to be done and over, or else she wouldn't have taken the menial settlement that she did. I mean, losing her daughter and going through what she went through, the whole ordeal, drove home what's really important.
It was a bitter pill for Priscilla to swallow. Violating the court order, she kept 50 household items, everything from the food processor to the Silver Fox bedspread. She also left a little present for her ex-husband, a pile of something from the cat and the dog.
Priscilla and her friends remained convinced that Davis was a murderer.
He did it. I have absolutely no doubts. It tormented Priscilla till the day she died.
In 2001, Priscilla died of breast cancer at the age of 59. Although Davis had been accused of killing to keep what he had, in the end he had nothing. Davis went bankrupt in the oil bust of the 1980s and was forced to sell his mansion. Not long after his acquittal for attempted murder, Cullen Davis said he found God and joined an evangelical church. Today, he is a missionary preaching around the world. The children of Stan Farr, Priscilla's murdered boyfriend, sued Davis for wrongful death. They settled out of court. Davis agreed to pay them $250,000. Dee Davis still believes that Cullen got away with the murder of her sister.
He might have found Jesus, but he still killed my sister. And he still got away with it.
The mansion, the symbol of Cullen's power and privilege, has had a curious history since its notorious heyday. For a while, it was a steakhouse. Then it became a Mexican restaurant. Now, of all things, it's a church. For Court TV, I'm Dominic Dunn.
Welcome to another crime scene.